Take a look at the massive debt clock in Times Square, or pull up the numbers straight from the U.S. Treasury website. What you'll see is a figure so enormous that your brain can't even process it. Right now, it's racing past $35 trillion and speeding toward $38 trillion. Here's how crazy that is. If you took 38 trillion $1 bills and stacked them one on top of another, that tower wouldn't just touch the moon, it would go way past it. For years and years, politicians and money experts brushed this number aside. They kept telling us not to worry because we basically owe this money to ourselves, or that as long as our economy keeps growing, the debt isn't really a problem. They made it seem like the national debt was just some big score in a video game looks frightening, but nothing bad actually happens because of it. But something shifted in 2024. We've crossed into a completely new financial reality where the debt isn't just some abstract number anymore. It's become a monster that's starting to eat away at the entire U.S. government budget. Here's the shocking part. For the very first time in American history, our government is now paying more money just on interest for the debt than it spends on our entire military. Let that sink in for a second. We're repaying more to satisfy old bondholders from the past than we respending to fund and protect our military right now. We're literally spending more on interest payments than we spend on the whole Medicaid program. That interest bill by itself is closing in on $1 trillion every single year. This creates something absolutely terrifying called the debt spiral. When a regular family has too much debt, what do? They tighten their belts, stop going to restaurants, maybe cancel their streaming subscriptions. But here's the thing, the government isn't like a regular household. A huge chunk of U.S. government spending is locked in place, things like Social Security and Medicare. These are commitments the government made to older Americans that politicians simply cut on break without ending their careers. So cutting spending isn't really an option. Instead, to cover the interest on existing debt, the government has to borrow even more money. It's like using a brand new credit card to make the minimum payment on your old credit card. This makes the total debt bigger, which means next year's interest payments go up even more, which means they need to borrow even more money. It's a mathematical trap that just keeps feeding itself and growing exponentially. Here's the scary truth, there's no normal way to escape this trap. When it comes to handling massive government debt like this, there are really only 3 traditional options, and 2 of them are completely impossible in America. Right now, option number 1 is austerity. This would mean raising taxes through the roof and slashing spending brutally. To actually balance the budget and start chipping away at the debt, the government would need to either double everyone's income taxes or completely shut down the U.S. military. Neither of these is ever going to happen. Any politician who suggests cutting Social Security benefits by 30% is basically ending their own career. Any president who tries to push through a 70% tax rate will get destroyed in the next election. The American economy has become completely dependent on government spending. If you suddenly pulled the plug, we'd instantly plunge into another Great Depression. So austerity? Not happening. Option number 2 is just refusing to pay. The government could literally stand up in front of everyone and announce, "We're not paying this back." Countries like Argentina and Russia have done this before. But for the United States, the country that issues the world's main currency, this would be like pressing the nuclear button. The entire planet's financial system, every single bank, every pension fund, every business deal runs on the belief that U.S. Treasury bonds are completely safe. If the U.S. said, "We're not paying," the global banking system would implode overnight. International trade would stop. Your credit cards would stop working. We're talking about financial chaos like we've never seen. So outright default? Also not happening. That leaves just one way out. The third option, the one that literally every empire throughout history has eventually picked, from ancient Rome to Weimar Germany to Britain after World War II, it's the easiest path to take. It's what you might call the sneaky default. You don't tell anyone you're refusing to pay. You pay back every penny you owe, but you pay it back with money that's worth way less than when you first borrowed it. You just print more currency to cover the difference. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory. This is actually the real strategy the United States government is using, even though they'll never say it out loud. It's called financial repression, and it's basically designed to move wealth from everyday savers into the government's hands. Sure, the bondholders get their money back, but that money now buys way less food and can't afford the same houses. They disguise all this as problems with supply chains or temporary inflation. Right now, we're watching a massive change in how money policy works, and it's called fiscal dominance. For the last 40 years, the Federal Reserve was in charge. It would raise interest rates to stop inflation, even if it hurt the economy in the process. Today, so the Fed has no choice but to accept higher inflation. It has to keep rates lower than they should really be. It's been turned into a helper for the Treasury spending addiction. The central bank's independence is slowly dying. We're heading into a time where the money printing machine is permanently welded to the government's budget. This is the hidden emergency that nobody's talking about. It's not going to be a sudden, dramatic crash. It's more like slowly turning up the heat on a pot of water. That $38 trillion number is going to keep climbing higher. It'll hit $40 trillion, then $50 trillion. But at the same time, what your dollar can buy will keep dropping. The government is gambling that they can inflate away the debt faster than people freak out and the market crashes. It's like walking a tightrope over a canyon. If they print money too slowly, the debt crushes them. If they print money too fast, we end up with crazy hyperinflation. They retrying to thread the needle, perfectly keeping inflation running at around 4% or 5% for 10 years straight. That might sound manageable, but when it compounds over time, it's absolutely devastating. With 5% inflation, your savings get cut in half in just 14 years. That's literally the plan wipe out half the value of the national debt and half the value of your hard-earned savings. By the mid-2030s, in the next part, I'm going to break down the exact tools they're using to pull this off. We'll dive into things like yield curve control, how they manipulate the CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index, and how they force banks to buy government debt that nobody else even wants. We're going to expose the mechanics behind this massive wealth transfer from regular people to Washington. If you want to understand how the government plans to make $38 trillion vanish into thin air, you don't need to predict the future, you just need to look at the past. We're not in some brand new situation here. We're literally replaying the exact same economic strategy the United States used after World War II. Back in 1945, the U.S. debt compared to the size of the economy hit 119%. The government didn't pay that off by raising taxes. They didn't refuse to pay. They made the debt disappear through negative real interest rates. For 10 years straight, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates capped at 2.5%, while inflation was running at over 6%. Every single year, the people holding those bonds lost 3.5% of their buying power. This was an intentional transfer of wealth from regular savers to the government. Today, they were using that same playbook again, but they've upgraded it with 3 modern weapons, specifically designed to make sure you don't realize you being robbed until it's way too late. Tool number 1, the trapped buyer. In a truly free market, if a government is $38 trillion in debt and spending money recklessly, investors would demand way higher interest rates to lend them anything. They'd say, "You're a risky bet, so you need to pay me 10%. But the U.S. government can't afford to pay 10%. So they rig the system by creating buyers who have no choice. Through a complicated web of banking rules like Basel III and Dodd-Frank, the government actually forces banks, insurance companies, and pension funds to hold U.S. Treasury bonds. Regulators label U.S. Treasuries as high-quality liquid assets, that's HQLA. Banks are legally required to hold these assets to meet their liquidity coverage ratios. It doesn't even matter if the bonds only pay 0.1% interest or if they're reactively losing value. Banks have to buy them just to keep their doors open. This creates fake demand. It forces the entire financial system to lend money to the government at suppressed rates, no matter how risky it actually is. Your pension fund isn't buying government debt because it's smart investing. It's buying it because it's literally illegal not to. Tool number 2, the rigged measurement CPI. If you want to pay people less money, but you've promised to pay them based on inflation, the simplest trick is to just redefine what inflation means. Social Security payments and tips, Treasury inflation-protected securities, are tied to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. If the CPI shows 10%, the government has to pay out 10% more. So the government has billions of reasons to keep the official CPI number as low as possible. Since the 1980s, they've quietly changed how they calculate CPI to keep the official number down. They introduced something called substitution bias. Here's their logic. If steak prices go up, you won't buy steak anymore, you'll switch to hamburger. So they argue your cost of living has really gone up as much as the steak price suggests. The CPI tracks the hamburger price instead, completely ignoring the fact that your quality of life just dropped. They also brought in hedonic adjustments. If a new car costs $5,000 more than last year's model, but it has better safety features, the government says the price didn't actually increase. They adjust the price down because they claim the quality went up. These sneaky statistical tricks save the government billions of dollars. If we calculated inflation using the 1980 method today, the real inflation rate would consistently be double what they're officially reporting. The government is basically lying to you about what your own life costs so they can save money on their budget. Tool number 3, fiscal dominance. Finally, there's what's called the central bank safety net. Historically, the Federal Reserve was supposed to be independent. Its job was to protect the value of the dollar. Under fiscal dominance, the Fed loses that independence. Its main job becomes keeping the Treasury from going broke. When foreign countries like China or Japan stop buying U.S. debt, which they've already started doing, the Fed jumps in as the buyer of last resort. It prints fresh money to buy the bonds that nobody else wants to touch. This is what they call quantitative easing, or QE. By buying up the debt, the Fed artificially keeps the interest rates low. This keeps the government's interest bill affordable, but it floods the entire economy with brand new dollars. What happens next? The stock market goes up, real estate prices go up, and asset prices completely disconnect from reality. This is what people call the everything bubble. It creates an illusion of wealth. Your 401k balance looks bigger, your home value looks higher, but it's all a monetary mirage. You've got more dollars in your account, but those dollars buy less than they did 10 years ago. The government is essentially paying off its debt by watering down your piece of the pie. The bottom line, the U.S. government isn't going to officially default. Instead, they're going to inflate the debt away. They're going to keep interest rates below the real inflation rate for the next 10 years. This is the silent theft. If you leave your money sitting in a savings account earning 4%, while real inflation is running at 8%, guess what? You're the one paying off the national debt. You're the donor class. The only way to escape this system is to own things the government can't print more of. Serious direct-to-camera. We've just covered how the government uses inflation and regulations to quietly steal your wealth. But sometimes the quiet approach isn't fast enough for them. When a government gets truly desperate, they drop the subtlety completely. They just change the rules to make your wealth legally theirs. Back in 1933, the United States government did exactly that. They made it a crime to own the one asset that let citizens shield themselves from inflation. Franklin D. Roosevelt signed something called Executive Order 6102. which seized the gold from every single American citizen, and if you refused, you face 10 years in prison. In my next video, I'm going to tell you the complete, uncensored story of the Great Gold Seizure. We'll uncover the secret trials, the legal tricks that wealthy people used to get away with keeping their gold, and the frightening legal precedent that still allows the president to seize your Bitcoin, gold, and even your 401k during a national emergency today. You need to find out if your safe is actually safe. Hit that like button to keep this message going and subscribe so you don't miss the untold history of the gold ban. I'll see you in the vault. We've just established that the government is erasing its debt by destroying the value of your money. But here's the thing, this process isn't hitting everyone the same way. Actually, it's the main driving force behind the growing wealth inequality that's ripping the United States apart right now. To understand why this is happening, we need to go back to an 18th century French economist named Richard Cantillon. He noticed something that's now called the Cantillon effect. He figured out that where new money enters the economy is everything. When the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion, they don't drop it from planes over Iowa. They don't send every citizen a check in the mail. Instead, they pump it straight into the financial sector. They buy bonds from companies like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and BlackRock. These big institutions get the fresh money first, and they get it at basically zero interest. They use this free cash to snap up assets, stocks, real estate, tech companies, you name it. By the time this newly created money trickles down to the average worker through wages, all the prices have already gone up. The wealthy get the money before inflation kicks in. Regular people get the money after inflation has already eaten away at its value. This is exactly why, since 2008, we've seen what's called a K-shaped economy. The asset-owning class, the top 10%, has watched their wealth skyrocket because the Fed keeps pumping up the value of their stocks and homes. The wage-earning class, the bottom 90%, has watched their buying power collapse because their paychecks cut and keep up with rising rent and grocery prices. The national debt is essentially being paid off by draining the American middle class dry, the death of safe savings. This whole dynamic is forcing us to completely rethink how we save money. For the past 40 years, the standard advice was simple: work hard, save 10% of what you earn, stick it in a bank, and buy government bonds. This was called the 60-40 portfolio. It was built for a world where money actually held its value. In today's world of fiscal dominance, following this advice is financial self-destruction. If you save in regular cash, you're guaranteed to lose money. If you buy government bonds, you're guaranteed to lose purchasing power. We've entered an age of forced risk-taking. Just to keep your wealth from disappearing, you're forced to take chances. You have to put money into stocks, real estate, or cryptocurrency just to stay ahead of the currency devaluation. The government has basically turned the entire economy into a giant casino, where you're forced to gamble just to survive because the supposedly safe option of saving is being deliberately destroyed. The final move, CBDCs, but the ultimate weapon in the government's toolkit hasn't been used yet. Right now, it's being built in the basement levels of the Federal Reserve. It's called a central bank digital currency, or CBDC. At this moment, the government's power to manipulate the economy is limited by physical cash. If the Fed sets interest rates at -5% to wipe out the debt faster, you could just withdraw your cash from the bank and stuff it under your mattress to avoid the penalty. Physical cash is the ultimate escape hatch from government control. It lets you exit the banking system completely. A CBDC eliminates that escape route. If the dollar becomes purely digital, the Federal Reserve gains absolute control. They can implement negative interest rates instantly. They can automatically deduct 1% from your account balance every month to force you to spend it. They can put expiration dates on money, telling you that your stimulus payment must be spent within 30 days or it just disappears. This isn't science fiction. It's already being tested in China with their digital yuan. The digital dollar is the ultimate answer to the debt crisis. It gives the government the power to micromanage how fast money moves through the economy and confiscate wealth with just a few keystrokes. The push toward a cashless society isn't about making your life more convenient. It's about control. It's about making sure there's no way out when the massive wealth transfer kicks into high gear. The final verdict. The United States is defaulting right now. It's a slow, polite, bureaucratic default, but it's still a default. That $38 trillion is never getting paid back in real value. The winners are going to be people who own scarce assets, real estate, gold, Bitcoin, profitable businesses, things that can't be printed out of thin air. The losers will be people who trust the currency and trust the institutions. The American dream of saving your way to prosperity is dead and gone. We're now playing the game of asset survival. Serious, direct to camera. We've talked about how the government uses inflation and digital control to slowly take your wealth. But history proves that when a government becomes truly desperate, they stop being subtle about it. They stop asking nicely. They just take it. In 1933, the United States government, supposedly the land of the free, did exactly that. They criminalized owning the one asset that protected citizens from inflation. Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, confiscating the gold from every American citizen, and if you refused, you'd face 10 years behind bars. In the next video, I'm going to reveal the full, unfiltered story of the Great Gold Seizure. We'll expose the secret prosecutions, the legal loopholes that rich people exploited to protect their gold, and the terrifying legal precedent that still gives the president power to seize your Bitcoin, gold, and 401k during a declared national emergency today. You need to know whether your safe is actually safe. Smash that like button to keep this message alive and subscribe so you don't miss the shocking history of the gold ban. I'll see you in the vault.